At the beginning of the film To Die For, directed by Gus Van Sant, there is a moment I think about that demonstrates not just how it sets up the entire film, but just how important music in movies is. At the beginning of the film, we get nice, snow-covered landscapes of Little Hope, New Hampshire, with lush violin strings and quiet horns that sound like a traditional score, something that you can hear in any movie opening like this. Then all of a sudden, the score does this right as the film introduces what the main character is accused of. And just as we are getting into this heavy metal Anthrax style beat, we all of a sudden cut back to what the score sounded like in the opening seconds. Only for it to get back into the heavy metal sound again, and I think you're starting to get it here. Danny Elfman's score basically sets up the entire film from the get-go. It doesn't just set up how balls to the wall crazy this film is, but it also specifically sets up how the character of Suzanne Stone views reality. If you've never heard of this film before, the movie is essentially a mockumentary satire that discusses the murder of Suzanne Stone's husband, and how she manipulates and tricks 3 young high school students into committing the murder for her. The character of Suzanne Stone is a woman who will stop at nothing to get famous. She is a weather girl at a local cable TV station, but she wants much more than that, and she essentially tries to use this murder as a way to get herself notoriety and plans not only to make money off of this, but to see if she can get a long-term career as a television personality from this. The film is set up like a true crime documentary. It almost feels like a precursor to those true crime TV shows that has recreations of actual events combined with interviews. However, the difference between those stories and this one is that To Die For has a totally messed up story. What I'm telling you about the film now doesn't even scratch the surface of how disturbing and messed up it actually is, but I remember the movie specifically for the score and just how well the score and the soundtrack complement the movie. You see, Danny Elfman's score is less concerned with reflecting what's literally happening on screen than with pulling the audience into Suzanne Stone's warped perception of reality. At some points the music sounds upbeat, glamorous, or whimsical, other times it's entirely Anthrax, Pantera, Motorhead style heavy metal. The score encourages you to see the world the way she does, or at least understand how she rationalizes her actions. That disconnect is what gives the film much of its satirical bite. After that opening, you begin to notice that the score isn't trying to tell you what's happening, it's telling you how Suzanne experiences what's happening. That's a very different job. A lot of film scores are built around mood. If someone dies, the music becomes tragic. If there's a chase, the music becomes tense. If 2 characters fall in love, the orchestra swells. The score is acting almost like an emotional translator for the audience, but there are some scores that reject that idea entirely. Instead, they become psychological narrators, and that's what I want to talk about today. I've noticed that when I think about musical scores that have resonated with me, I like musical scores that basically tell us what a character is feeling internally, rather than the music just going through the motions and playing what the most logical music should be played on screen. Instead, the music does something entirely different. It plays something that's more in vein to the character's feeling. One of the earliest and most striking examples is A Clockwork Orange. Wendy Carlos combines familiar classical Beethoven music along with cold electronic soundscapes that feel both beautiful and deeply unnatural. The result isn't simply a futuristic atmosphere, it's a musical world where elegance and brutality exist side by side. The film's violence isn't treated like an interruption to civilization, it's presented as though it has become another part of it. Alex literally sings Singing in the Rain while brutally assaulting a couple, and somehow the music makes the moment even more disturbing because of how detached it is from the violence. It's as if the culture has evolved technologically while remaining morally stagnant, and the music becomes the bridge connecting those contradictions. Kubrick would return to this philosophy with The Shining, but this time he strips away almost everything we would recognize as a traditional score. Much of the music isn't melodic at all. Instead, it's built from sustained clusters, dissonant choirs, unsettling drones, and overwhelming textures that almost seem to come from the Overlook Hotel itself. There are even moments where the score appears to imitate Jack Torrance's movements of mental state, making it feel as though the building is breathing alongside of him.
What do you want to talk about?
Rather than telling us whether the supernatural forces inside the hotel are real, the music locks us into Jack's deteriorating perception. We experience the uncertainty exactly as he does, unable to distinguish between psychological collapse and genuine haunting. If Kubrick demonstrated how music could become a character's subconscious, David Lynch took the idea even further. In Lynch's films, music rarely behaves like traditional accompaniment. Angelo Badalamenti's haunting compositions, combined with Lynch's meticulous sound design, blur together until it becomes impossible to separate dreams, memories, and objective reality. The audience is no longer watching a character from the outside, they're trapped inside that character's consciousness. In films like Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive, music isn't simply supporting the images, it's actively reshaping our understanding of them, making us question whether what we're seeing is real, imagined, or something in between. Kubrick and Lynch approach music in remarkably similar ways. Neither filmmaker was interested in lush orchestral themes that simply told the audience how to feel. Instead, they favored dense textures, unsettling harmonies, and walls of sound that created psychological spaces rather than emotional cues. Their scores don't accompany the films, they become part of the environment itself. But as fascinating as those approaches are, I think it's even more impressive when a composer can write music that is undeniably beautiful, memorable, and melodic while still functioning as a psychological narrator. That's why I keep coming back to composers like Jonny Greenwood and Trent Reznor with Atticus Ross. Listen to There'll Be Blood. Greenwood's score frequently ignores the emotional beats audiences expect. Instead of reacting to Daniel Plainview's actions, the music often anticipates his ambition, greed, and obsession before he even expresses them. It feels less like commentary and more like we're hearing the machinery inside his mind. The same idea appears in The Social Network. Reznor and Ross don't score the rise of Facebook like a triumphant success story. Their electronic textures are cold, anxious, and strangely isolating. Even during moments of incredible achievement, the music suggests that something fundamental is missing. Rather than celebrating Mark Zuckerberg's accomplishments, the score places us inside the relentless drive that fuels him, a mindset where every victory immediately creates another problem to solve. What fascinates me is that every composer we've talked about arrives at this idea from a completely different angle. Kubrick and Lynch often immerse us in walls of sound and unsettling textures. Jonny Greenwood uses dissonance to expose obsession before it surfaces. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross strip down music into cold electronic pulses that reveal emotional emptiness beneath outward success. None of these scores are simply decorating the images, they're translating a character's inner world into sound, but there's another way to accomplish the same thing, and it's arguably even more difficult. What if the music doesn't sound disturbing at all? What if it sounds charming, optimistic, even absurdly upbeat? What if the score constantly changes its own identity just as the main character changes hers? That's exactly why Danny Elfman's score on To Die For feels so special. Suzanne Stone doesn't see herself as the villain, she sees herself as the star. Every interview she gives, every smile she flashes at the camera, every manipulative decision she makes is filtered through this fantasy that she's destined to become America's next television celebrity. So Elfman's score constantly shifts identities. One moment it sounds like the opening to a wholesome family drama, the next it erupts into aggressive heavy metal. Then, before you can process what just happened, it slides back into warm orchestral music as if nothing ever happened. Those transitions shouldn't work, they're abrupt, they're almost ridiculous, but that's precisely why they work, because that's Suzanne. She can convince herself that she's living in a glamorous success story while orchestrating something monstrous. The score isn't contradicting itself, it's mirroring the contradictions inside her mind. The idea doesn't just apply to Suzanne, it extends to other characters as well. Take Jimmy, for example. The first time he sees Suzanne, the moment isn't met with music that stimulates romance or innocence. Instead, a blistering punk rock cue explodes onto the soundtrack as Suzanne walks past him. By this point in the film, we already know Jimmy is sitting in jail, accused of murdering Suzanne's husband, so the audience understands where this relationship is ultimately headed. The music isn't foreshadowing in the traditional sense, it's placing us inside Jimmy's instant obsession. Suzanne doesn't walk into his life as an ordinary woman, she arrives like a force of nature, someone who completely overwhelms his judgment. The aggressive music tells us that this encounter isn't the beginning of a love story, it's the beginning of a collision that will consume him. When people talk about great film scores, they usually talk about the melodies they remember or the emotions they felt, but I think the scores that stay with me the longest are the ones that quietly change the way I understand a character. They aren't just making a scene more exciting or more emotional, they're revealing something that dialogue and cinematography alone can't. They're letting us hear a character's inner world. That's why I keep coming back to Die For. Danny Elfman's score isn't simply accompanying Suzanne Stone's story, it's allowing us to experience the fantasy she's constructed for herself. It's glamorous, absurd, charming, violent, and completely detached from reality, just like Suzanne. And to me, that's what the very best film music can do. It doesn't just tell us what a movie feels like, it tells us how its characters feel about themselves, even when they're the last people we should trust. Thank you all for watching, hope you loved this video, and like and subscribe to Film 513.